to say users with these roles in Azure will be able to use these commands as root locally. Once we get that done, our desire is to actually have logging. If we get the authentication event in Azure, we would be able to use that access token to then post a log file to Splunk, to some sort of cloud logging system that you have. So now not only do you have off-box authentication, you've got a very strong non-repudiation system to do off-box logging of what's going on. And in that case, we'd actually be able to log what command they did, and then also be able to log what the result of that was if you wanted us to do that. So some really cool things that we'll be able to do there going forward. Our goal with Jamf Connect, and so far we've been keeping to this, is to be MDM agnostic. We're just a package with a configuration profile. So we can work in pretty much any environment that you can push a package and that you can have a configuration profile in there. Our other goal is to be IDP agnostic. We are not an identity provider at Jamf. We have no interest in being one. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of stuff that goes into that. We've got plenty enough to do on our own. We want the customer to be able to bring whatever identity provider they have. Whether that's Azure, whether that's Okta, Google, OneLogin, Ping, all of those we should be able to support through, again, that standard OpenID Connect operation, or if you're using directly. Gives us a little bit more flexibility in there. So yeah, we're really looking forward to this and kind of doing a lot more work in how we can kind of create that least privileges environment and be able to set up that kind of bifurcated system where just because you're an admin or a non-admin on the machine doesn't necessarily mean that you have admin access or full access to the system. Questions on that?
I'm just wondering, because we are talking only about things which are working, and as an admin, you are more interested in tracing the things which are not working. So I'm just wondering what kind of from the beginning.
Sure. Authenticated to Azure and they failed, you'd actually be able to track that because you would see failed authentications and ideally do some log harvesting and look for there. You can track failed authentications in the login window because we are interested in this as well, right? In our case, we're kind of looking at maybe a little bit differently. If I went to the printing preference pane and I've authenticated 9 times in 5 minutes to add a printer, maybe something's wrong. One, why are they adding a printer, right? I mean, this is 2019. Two, maybe whatever they're trying to set up, they're confused about. So can we proactively reach out to the user and maybe send them an email? Hey, we don't want to be like Clippy, but I see you're trying to add a printer and you've tried pretty hard. Is it not working? And the other thought is this could easily be somebody kind of jiggling the handle on the door and attempting to do a remote exploit or who knows what, right? And so we those authentication requests are denied and then take action based upon that. Other questions? All right, let me show you what this looks like in Azure. That was the train from Prague. Our Azure portal. So here we are, Azure Active Directory is, we've got an app registration, and the particular one that we're using at the login window is Jamf Connect Login. If we look at the manifest, we've got a couple of things. This is where we've set up the roles. This is a little bit manual in Azure still, but we roles. In this case, we call it admin and standard.
Other settings that are down here, redirect URIs, other bits and pieces. If we go to the actual app itself here, we can click on total.
And these are all the users that have been associated with this application, and then whether they're standard or admin on this app. And so it's really easy. You can add another user, go into here, select it. I've got the user there. I can select the user. And then I can select a role. didn't save correctly, but you get the idea of what you can do through there. So, and this is how we can add admin or a standard user on the device, them, and every time that they sign in thereafter. So again, we want to keep kind of all of the identity pieces in the identity provider that you're already using. We didn't want to have a proxy system or something else like that. When you're authenticating through Jamf Connect on the Mac, you are authenticating directly back. There's nothing that Jamf is doing in between. So for GDPR purposes, we are neither an importer or a processor of any of this information. All that bits are between you, your own scripts, and on your own machine here. And in Poland, it's, what's the acronym? What? RODO. And what does that stand for? That's what I thought. That was GDPR. So again, we wanted to be very cognizant of that you weren't just to use this app, all right, so that we've got in there. In the authentications and everything else going on here, I'll be able to grab individual users and look at them. For the properties, this is all fairly simple, and it's just right out of the box. The only thing we really need is this application ID, because that's what we use to authenticate against. In the most case, we make it non-visible to users because they have no way of signing into this through the kind of web portal. And if you want user assignment required, you can select this, and then now not all of the users in your domain will be able to authenticate. All right, so Azure has a couple of different ways of doing this, but typically what we find is you actually require a user assignment and then just add groups of users or whatever else you want to do. Better to opt to the more safe side than not as you go through that. From Jamf perspective, if I open up my Jamf, this is the new 10.14.4. There we go. So this is our configuration. If I go down here to pre-stage enrollments, Jamf Connect login, and enrollment packages. So that's the image. I mean, that's what we're pushing. It's a package. I've got a few extra things in here to do the demos with. Jamf Connect Verify is added. But otherwise, it's just dropping this one PKG file into a pre-stage. MDM providers, AirWatch, Simple MDM, some of the others have their own way of doing this. This is all done through the await configuration part of the. As long as your MDM provider can do that, we're happy to. In the general settings, we've gone through here and selected all of the file vault. I just need to turn on, it doesn't make any difference. So we've selected all of these so that the user doesn't get prompted for any of this information. Because we wanted that whole enrollment, sign-in, first setup process to be as smooth as possible and just get out of the way. And the magic really happens in this account settings section where we've got skip account creation down here. And because of that, we go through the setup assistant and create that new local account. So they don't have any choice as to whether they're admin or not. They don't have any choice.
Is we're leveraging everything.
And that way we know it's repeatable and what it should be. Because we're doing this, we do have to create an additional administrative user. So you can set that up here so that you have a user on there. Into here, I can show you, we're pushing profiles. Here's a file vault redirection profile, some of the Jamf Connect Verify settings for up here. This is the Jamf Connect login. It's not many preference keys, as we don't need a huge amount with it. Here we are authenticating to Azure. Here's the redirect or the help URL. License file can be embedded in this. And the resource owner password grant ID for the app in Azure that we're authenticating against. So all of this is pushed via profile. My preferred way is we'll create the configuration
and then we'll just upload it directly into Jamf and then scope it as appropriately. That gets pushed to the
local machine, and then everything flies on through. We do have another thing that's kind of fun that we've done a lot of our testing with. So we have an application, is it running here? There it is, called OpenID Connect Authentication. And so we're able to actually go in, select from a variety of identity providers you've been working with lately, and choose which one you want to use, IBM Cloud Identity, fill out some of this, hit load, and we'll actually be able to authenticate you in this web view window. When that's done, and if we successfully authenticate, we'll show you the tokens so that you can actually see what they are, validate that you're getting the information that you think you want. So this is one of the things that we use for testing, because testing at the login window can be a little bit problematic. Because if you do it wrong, maybe you won't be getting back into the machine, right? So we always recommend do all your testing with Jamf Connect login at the, in a VM so you can roll it back. The other fun thing that not a lot of people know, so we can kind of show it, this is kind of fun, you can actually launch the login window from the command. So in this particular case, we would do, let me just do another sudo command. And since we made this module just sufficient instead of required, I can actually come down here and still use my password to authenticate instead of having to go through there. So we can use the log command to actually stream what's going on. We'll use the debug flag to do it. And I'm lazy and I can't remember the predicate statements that Josh always tells me. com.jamf.connect. All right, so this go over here, security authorize system login. And so this is actually window while I'm still logged in. Now you can test with this, and it's a little bit harder to lock yourself out. It's still a really kind of a weird system, so I wouldn't recommend doing it. But for testing the authentication, the login window, and this works for the login window regardless of whether you're using, it just triggers that authentication right, and then you can watch that whole flow through and see what's going on. So in this case, I always get that off. There we go. Here's my password. Now it's going to ask me for my password again so I can create the local user account. And once you've set up a user this way, in some situations we have customers that only use this for the onboarding. The only thing they really care about Jamf Connect login is that first user on the system, so that you can set it up with real authentication with multi-factor and things like that. Once the user has been put onto the machine, you can then immediately remove our login window and reset it back to the standard Mac OS one. All right? So if you don't want to freak out users or you're worried about anything along those lines, very simple to do. In this case, we're going to add another user. And this now completes, well, we got the EULA, there we go, done. And then we got this, there you go, done. All right, now we're completed, and you can see that we actually succeeded in authorizing that right. If I now go back here to a new test user on this machine that we'll have just created by logging in at the login window there. All right, because all the normal stuff, the same things that happen when you're actually logging in for real, happen here. This window up on its own. All right, so now we've got that user there. If I go into directory utility, and you can see it's a non-admin, and that's because of the role that we have it inside Azure. So if I look at the user account now, go to test. Again, this is the actual full email address or whatever they use to sign in, and then this is the timestamp from a minute or two ago when we actually authenticated the user via Azure. And look at app registrations, and then Jamf Connect login, and then here, and look at the users. You'll see that the test user is in here only once, and they're marked as a standard user, whereas the account that I signed in as was in here twice, default access, which is just what happens when you add them. Actually in here 3 times. Look, I got everything. But I do have admin as one of my roles. And so when I signed in at the login window, this is what the login window picked up on and then made the Joel account an admin once we got to the Finder. Questions on any of this? I'm now just stalling until a pizza shows up, right? No? How much longer do I have to go? 2 minutes? 15. All right, we can do that. That's cool. All right, that's easy. That's simple. So Azure's a lot of fun. The next thing that we've started working on is actually putting. Anybody doing anything with like Amazon Lambda instances, microservices, those kinds of things?
Anybody doing it in Azure? All right, we have 1 in Amazon, we have 0 in Azure. Anybody doing it in Google?
So cool. So a similar idea in Node.js, is that how you call it? All right, not Node.js. All right, you're holding judgment, that's good. So you can write it in Node, you can write it in Python, and what we're looking to do at the login window,
Once you've authenticated through the login window, and we have that ID token,
then use that ID token and kind of let me show this to you. I'll be able to go into here, Azure Active Directory. So I've got one I can authenticate against. Here's the application ID, copied. Let me go to this auth app, Azure, put that app ID in there, remove the tenant, remove the scopes, and I'll load this in. So this is what we're doing at the login window. I'm going to sign in as that test account. And then my password. So if I successfully authenticated, I get 3 things out of here. Here's the access token. So this is a bearer token that if I was going to hit other APIs or other services, I could just add that to the authorization header. Really nice and really easy way of getting access to other systems. Here's my refresh token. This is similar to the bearer token, although I can use it for a lot longer. You can hit an endpoint with the refresh token, which will then issue you another token, is then typically good for a much shorter period of time. And then down here, we've got the full ID token. So in this ID token is effectively what my user record is. So in Azure, you can set up a lot of settings as to what may or may not be added to this. You can get group membership. You can get the roles. So right here, you can see that we've got a standard role. And this is just a bunch of JSON. One of the places that we go to kind of decode this there's lots of projects to do the decoding, but this is one of the simplest ways. And if I do that, there we go. So this is that ID token. And now you can see a couple of things. You can see what it was signed with. You can see when it's good for, what my name is. So by authenticating at the login window, we get all of this the authentication process. All right. So this is a treasure trove. What you're used to doing with maybe if you're on the Mac, you know, Discal DSCL and looking up a user record, this is effectively the user record in a portable fashion. Even better than that, it's been signed cryptographically by Azure. So this kind of light green piece down here, this is actually a cryptographic signature. And you can actually validate this against this signing key, because this is one of the well-known signing keys that Azure for it. So now in one kind of encapsulated package, you have what ticket. Because now you can use the same ticket to authenticate to services. That service can look at your password, or not your password here, but your ID token, validate that it was correctly signed by Azure, look inside here for your username, any sort of other information that might be in here, including your IP address that you've been coming from, those kinds of things. And then use that to determine whether you should have access to the service or not. So in a future version of the login window, once the user signs in, we'll be able to hand this entire ID token off to a script that you're running through that run script mechanism that we had. You'll then be able to take this ID token, bounce it off an Azure function, because they've got some built-in ways of handling authentication there, go against a Google Cloud function, go against an Amazon